I don't know about you guys, but I love a good testimony. So here's mine. Let's hit it. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for checking this video out. I figure that because you guys are blessing me with your time by watching my videos, it's only right that I share with you my personal spiritual walk, my personal testimony in terms of how I first encountered God and then how I came to accept Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. It's something that took a very long time, I can tell you. I wasn't raised in the church. I was raised by just the most wonderful family, the most wonderful parents. My mom and dad are phenomenal. I have a beautiful, wonderful sister, and who always raised me, teaching me that there was a God and that God loved me very much. And the strategy that my parents took really was to let me kind of figure my faith out for myself as time went on. My father is from India and so was raised Hindu, and my mother is American and so she's originally from New York and had some religious experiences with Christianity in terms of, growing up and attending church and these things, and does not actively practice now. So what happened for me was that in terms of the area that I was raised in Northern Virginia. And the area that we moved to when I was around 10 or so, there was a really large and in the area very influential megachurch that was in the area. Now, I'm very confident because I have friends who go to different megachurches and these sorts of things, very, very large-scale churches who have just amazing experiences, and they're so blessed by the pastors and the church communities there within their congregations. It's amazing. The mega church that was in my area, unfortunately, really was not that, especially in terms of its influence in my life personally. And what I mean by that was that I went to elementary school, and we moved when I was in second grade to this area. The children of parents who were actively involved in that church were the ones I went to school with. And these children, what they were basically being taught by this mega church was that if you're not baptized, you're going straight to hell. And I was definitely going to hell. There was no doubt about that, because not only was I not baptized and was not an active believer, I didn't go to not only any church, but I didn't go to their church. And it was something that just, I'll tell you guys, my personal opinion on it is that perhaps the number one sin that I can think of, and as you guys know from this channel, I don't believe that human beings have any right to rank sin, and I think that it's something that we do far too often in the church, as if we knew God well enough to know that this is exactly how he'll judge you if you do this versus that versus this, and I'm a good person because of XYZ. We've really got some balls to be able to kind of claim those things, in my opinion, right? But to me, it's just in my personal head. I'm not saying that it's in God's eyes the number one sin, but in my eyes, the number one sin is coming in between an individual and God because of how you misrepresent God to them. And essentially the way that God was represented to me was this extremely harsh judge who would not love me or care about me or want anything to do with me unless I went to church and got baptized. And this baptism was essentially meaningless because they specifically told me that, well, what's the harm? What's the harm in being baptized? Just go and get baptized. It's not going to kill you. And if anything, it may save your soul, but, just go get baptized. As if baptism was so meaningless that it's just something that, you just, hey, it's Thursday. Why not? Let's go get baptized. That's such a ridiculous way to look at baptism. And it's such an arbitrary way to look at Christianity, let alone a personal relationship with Jesus, that it was just very disarming to me and really disappointing to me. And I just wanted to have nothing to do with a God like that. And that's the reason why I say to me it's the number one sin, is because I didn't say I don't want to have anything to do with a congregation like that or with that specific individual. I went straight to the top. And I said, I don't want to have anything to do with a God like that, because the way that the individuals who, purported themselves to be members of that faith, I judged their God based on their own behavior. And this is one of the reasons why, if you go to New Testament, you read my favorite book of the Bible, which is James, and you really hear about that. It's and James, brother of Jesus, talking about how, hey, it's not just having the beliefs. You have to be acting in accordance with them, and when we're not doing that, it is insufficient to be able to call ourselves a true follower of Jesus Christ. So, at the end of the day, the church that was in my area completely turned me off to the faith, and it made it such that my whole life up until graduate school, so including undergrad, etc., so until my early 20s, my whole life was spent actively disliking the faith of Christianity. And the reason that I disliked it was because of individuals who called themselves Christians in my community, but were the most judgmental people in the community at the same time. And their attending church was essentially as if they were to say, here's my membership card to the local country club. This gives me the right to be able to judge anyone however I so desire, and basically say, well, God's judging you, so I'm just, I'm one of God's fingers coming and judging you myself. Which is completely antithetical to Christianity and to being not only a believer in, but a follower of Christ. And it was very frustrating to me. So what ended up happening for me was that then I went to Oxford for my first doctorate, and I was in the Department of Psychiatry, and there was, and you can see I'm already smiling, right? There was a friend of mine, a very dear friend named Laura, who I will send this link to, so Laura, I love you. And Laura and her just absolutely wonderful husband, Jacob, were both active members of a church called St. Aldate's, which is where I ended up getting baptized. Now, I didn't know any of this. I had no idea whatsoever. And so what ended up happening was that at the time, not only what I definitely very proudly self-defined as being an atheist, but I had everything in terms of when I talk about rock and roll lifestyle, that was me. I had very long hair. I wore, skull t-shirts. I had these little fingerless gloves with little Satans on them that I very proudly, would wear around. And I mean, there were so many things. Every other word out of my mouth was the F word. I mean, I cursed like a sailor. I just could not care less about other people. I can tell you right now, in terms of indiscriminate dating and these sorts of things, I just wanted to be going out on dates and wanted to be seen with beautiful women and these things. That was me. And so what happened was that this massive transformation took place, and it all took place because of Laura. Because I didn't know many people in the area when I had moved. I moved this summer after my undergrad finished, so I got there a few months before everybody else in my graduate program got there. So what happened was that she invited me to a party. And she said, the thing is that you need to bring something to the party. So when you're 21 like I was, and you're in a new country and you think you're really too cool for school, and I can't tell you the number of years there that I very consciously tried not to smile and not to laugh in these things, to appear more dominant and to demonstrate higher value in these things. I mean, the sad part is that does work, just to tell you. And we can talk more about that on that channel, on this channel a little bit later in other videos. But that really was where my head was at, right, in my secular mindset at the time. I really didn't care how I got to my goals. I just wanted to get there, right? Most expedient way possible. So what do you bring, right? You bring the booze, obviously. So I went to the local equivalent of a liquor store. It was called Thresher's, kind of a convenience mart sort of a thing, but they sell alcohol. And I bought these 2 6-packs of Corona, right, of beer. And I go to the location of this party. And I go there, and the first thing that I notice is that nobody else brought alcohol. And, I think to myself, this means I'm the man, obviously. I brought the alcohol. So I'm, pulling these 2 things in the air all right, I've arrived, the party is officially here. The second thing that I notice is that nobody's cursing, and every single time that I drop an F-bomb or whatever I say, everybody's just staring at me, and that's it, right? And the third thing that I noticed, right, which I thought was really kind of quite odd, was that in terms of what everybody else was bringing, people were bringing chairs and these things. I'm like, this is extremely strange. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in. Peter, my friend, walks in with an acoustic guitar case. I'm like, who brings an acoustic guitar to a party? Then he puts all the chairs in a circle. I start to get a little worried. I'm like, that's cool because we can all sit in a circle and look at each other. Then he puts the Bibles on the chairs. This was not a party. This was like a Bible study. This was like a small group. I was not aware of this. So I bring all this alcohol to this small group, to this Bible study, right? Now, to be honest with you, I didn't want to leave because I'm like, I'm already at the party and the whole thing, and this would make me look really bad. I thought to myself, so I did the only logical thing, and I drank all the alcohol. So I think probably at least 10 of the 12 beers. I just downed the beer as quickly as I could, frankly, and got wasted at this almost like blackout drunk at this Bible study, right? And everybody's sitting around, they're singing hymns. They're like, like, you are my sunshine. I was wasted. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You like are my sunshine right now. Like I was out of it, right? And the thing is that by the time that, like the message and this kind of stuff, was done and the worship was done, everybody decided to stick around for at least like an hour afterwards. I think it was like a Thursday night or something. And Oxford's weird in terms of when you go to the office and why, especially when you're in grad school, right? It's really quite flexible. And so what happened is that I remember just sitting there and talking to these, especially to the guys. And when you're a young guy like I was, like 21 years old, you really have a lot of false bravado, and any confidence that you have is more focused on confidence that you're kind of giving yourself more than anything else, or it's confidence from sexual encounters, or it's confidence from having like your parents having money, or you having been rich, or it's not real. It is completely a facade of power and strength that you are exerting out onto the world. And there's something to be said, trust me on this, in terms of fake it till you make it. But I knew deep down that there was kind of this hollowness somewhere within me that I tried to fill with all kinds of stuff. And what happened was that I very quickly realized that these guys who were in there, and I gotta tell you, people weren't dressed up. They weren't folks that I would necessarily have, just on the street approached and been like, hey, let's go get a beer, whatever it is. But they were so calm, and so you could tell that there was this deep sense of peace and of deep rooted strength and of knowing who they were. And this was something that I did not have, but that I deeply desired as a young man. And even, I'm 33 right now, even as an older man, I still deeply desire, not only now that I'm further along in my journey, to have, but I am so much further than I was at that age, but to be able to kind of put on display and to be able to set down the right foundations for other men around me, especially younger men who I mentor. So what happened for me was that I knew that these guys had something, and let me tell you, I wanted to know what it was. I was confused. But the last thing that I ever wanted to do was to go to church. I didn't want to talk about God or anything like this. And all the Christians that I know in the past, they were very evangelical, and when I use that term, I'm talking about very focused on winning new believers or proselytizing at all costs, like really burn down this forest until we get every last person converted. That was what I was used to. And here I had people who literally were just living their lives. And the thing is that I'm a deep believer in the quote that some people need to hear a sermon. They do, right? But other people need to see one lived out. And these individuals were living in God's love and were expressing God's love to me without literally ever mentioning God and Christ and these sorts of things. I really think that we do God a disservice if we believe that the only way that we can, act God-like, right, or, in compliance with Christ is by constantly talking about him in every Facebook post, every meme, every snap, every Insta post, every sentence that we use being all about God all the time. That is the only way to do it. I think that's one way to do it. I know people who do that. I'm certainly not bashing them, right? But to that time, that's all that I had really been exposed to. So seeing this was completely different for me. So what happened to me was that the next day they invited me to be able to go and play ultimate frisbee because church was the next day. And they said, come and play with us. We're going to go to church afterwards. And I specifically told them, I'm not going to church. I have no interest in going to church. But, if you want me to go play Ultimate Frisbee, I didn't know a lot of people at the time. So I'm like, these are chill people. They're not giving me a hard time, right? So why not get to know them a little bit better? So I did. I went and I played Ultimate Frisbee with them. And I had a great time. And at the very end of it, they didn't say, hey, let's go to church. Basically said, we're going to church right now. It's just time for us to go. So I said, all right, see you guys later. And we ended up hanging out, I think, the next week doing something else, right? It's totally fine. But that was the end of it. The fact that there was no pressure whatsoever for me to do religious things with them, right, was huge for me. The fact that this kind of like pressureless approach, let me tell you, there's so much value in this, right? There really is. And trust me, as a former atheist who saw it, we see it. We see the way that you as a Christian are living your life. And if you are living it in compliance with God, God grants you very, very deep senses of peace that other people can see. Because we're human. We're all trying to figure it out. We're all so broken. And all of us are trying to figure out what the heck we are doing here on this little spinning orb. We're all trying to figure that out, right? So what happened was that time passed and I eventually started dating someone. And the person that I was dating was a self-defined Christian. And I remember it was my first really serious girlfriend. And I asked her, I said, would your dad be impressed if I took you to church? And she said, yeah, he'd love that. And I was like, we're going to church. I already know a church. I already know some good people. We'll go with them. So sure enough, we go, and I'll never forget, the graduate student pastor, Francois, who's just one of the best guys. Francois told me, he's like, I saved you a seat in the middle. You're really gonna feel it. And as somebody who'd really never been to church, I'm like, feel what? What are you talking about? So I go and I sit there, and worship starts, and I say, and for an atheist who's never been to church, and everybody's raising their hands up, and screaming out, and the eyes are closed, and the whole thing, I'm freaking out inside. I'm like, you people are out of your mind. You are just really, really weird. That's what I felt. I mean, there was no doubt about it, right? I can just tell you right now, that's what I felt. This is one of the weirdest things ever. So it was a really odd thing. And then people kept saying, it's so good to see you at church. We hope you come again. And in my head, I'm like, there's no chance that I'm coming again, right? Like to me, that was the end of it. I scored the brownie points with the dad. We're good to go, right? But the thing is that time passed. It was my first year of grad school, and any of you who have been to grad school or are thinking about going to graduate school, it's one of the most stressful things you'll do in your life. And obviously Oxford is a top tier school, right? Really, really challenging school. And what happened for me was that first year was really, really difficult. I had a lot of growing up to do, I can tell you right now. And I was seeking that deep structure. I was seeking that anchor point in my life. And again, trust me, I tried to anchor with just about everything, right? And I had a lot of misgivings about Christianity and these things, but I knew that this Francois guy was somebody that I had every confidence in, would never try to pressure me or give me a hard time. He wouldn't try to lecture me about God. If I had questions, he would answer them in a way that I could understand. Right? And sure enough, I ended up calling Francois and I asked him to meet at a coffee shop. I sat in the coffee shop and I told him I got some questions. And I told him I don't want to be kind of sitting here for hours now. I just got a couple of questions that I want to ask you. And he was so great about it. And these were the two big questions that I had that kind of represented the big turning point for me. The first question that I had was, my whole life I've been seeing all these Christians with, the chain and with the little cross, right? The cross is like a torture device. It's something that was used to execute people or to torture them. Why on earth would people be carrying around a medieval torture device around their neck? Didn't make any sense to me, right? Why are you doing it, right? And his answer to me was an answer that I'll never forget, because I was expecting, here's the historical significance and here's, all these things and, something that's really deeply, deeply rooted in, history, basically, right? And kind of an overly religious answer. But the answer that he gave me was one that made so much logical sense to me that I couldn't deny its veracity. And what he told me is he said, if you look at this cross, right? He said, you'll notice that it's longer this way than this way. And he said, I want you to think about your interactions with other people. He said, I want you to think that this is God and this is you. And that this relationship right, takes precedence, it has to, over your relationship with other people, represented by this bar here, right? And that you will never truly be able to be as deeply connected as you could be with anyone else unless you really have that relationship, that connection, almost that direct line between you and God. This was something that made so much sense to me. And it was so logical, and the name, the word Jesus didn't come up once. His description of the cross and explaining it to me in that metaphorical sense opened some kind of door within my heart to the point where I was interested in asking some more questions. And then he told me the thing that really I have never been able to forget in my entire life, right? And he basically said, here's the way I want you to conceptualize this faith. I want you to imagine that you're at the Grand Canyon. And you're walking down the Grand Canyon in the United States, right? And it's hot outside. If you've ever been, Grand Canyon's in the middle of like a desert, right? And when you're going down, it is hot and it can be steep at times. It can be very uncomfortable. And imagine that you're carrying this big old pack on your back, right? You're backpacking, right? You want to camp out. And you're walking down the little zigzags of the trail to get to the bottom. And you're sweating profusely and it's so uncomfortable. And you kind of just hate it, but you got to keep going, right? And somebody comes along with a donkey and says, and they do have these donkeys, comes along with this donkey and says, hey, like, it seems like you're having a really hard time. Why don't you just put the pack of this donkey on the back of this thing, hop on top or whatever, and you can, just enjoy the ride down. And you say, well, I don't, my wallet, I don't have the wallet or whatever, I can't pay you anything. So I appreciate the offer. This is definitely uncomfortable, but I can't pay for it. And the person who's got the donkey is like, I think you misunderstand. You don't have to pay me anything, right? All I want is for you to enjoy this experience. This is the time you've got or whatever, to see the Grand Canyon. It's amazing, right? So beautiful. And all I want is for you to enjoy it. So here's the donkey. You take it, right? Take that big old heavy pack that's weighing you down. I want you to put it on the back of the donkey, climb on top, and then I want you to enjoy your ride down. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want you to enjoy. And you do, and you hop on, and then all of a sudden, all of that weight that's been on you, that entire time is all of a sudden gone. And instead of focusing so much on the weight and the pain and the discomfort and just trying to get through the days, instead of that, you are all of a sudden free to genuinely take in the world as it always was. Even when you had the pack on, the world was still that way, but now you can deeply enjoy it and understand it, right? And have that connection with it. And that is what God has done for us through Jesus. So God is the man, right, who gave us the donkey, right? Jesus is the donkey, right? And in this case, the pack is essentially the pack of sin, right? That we have carried with us our entire lives. All of us are sinful. Trust me, the most religious of us, every single hour of the day we're sinning. It just is what it is. There is no one who does not need God, who does not need God's love, who does not need God's forgiveness. That person does not exist. And anyone who has a holier than thou attitude, because I've run into so many people of all faiths who are like that, that comes from a place of brokenness and deep hurt and insecurity, okay? It's not something to aspire to be very judgmental in these things towards other people and to act holier than thou. It doesn't make sense. So that is the way that the faith was described to me. And again, that door in my heart got a little bit more open. And this process of having conversations with Francois, conversations with another graduate student who was going on to be able to, get ordained in the Anglican Church, whose name is Christian, who's just the greatest guy, and his wife Helen is just amazing. And I love their family, and they're two wonderful children. These conversations with Christian Francois especially, but then with other Christian men especially, who became very close brothers to me, like my brother Dawid, his son Ollie is my godson. I love you, Ollie, if you're watching. These are kind of these moments that you'll always remember, these doors opening in your heart. And it's one of these amazing things with God where I think a lot of people have this perception of you have to chase after God. And it is true that we always need to be pursuing, but God is so loyal, and we always have this concept that God is at arm's length, but it's not God holding us at arm's length. It's literally us pushing God away and saying we can do it ourselves. We don't need God, right? there is this pridefulness in terms of believing that we not needing help makes us more of a man. It makes us stronger and more capable to not need anyone else, including God. And it's not true. There is great weakness in not pursuing assistance, regardless of whether we're religious or not, regardless of whether we believe in God or not. There is weakness in not accepting help and in believing that we can do and should do everything completely alone in a vacuum without reliance on relationships. I think it's a very unfortunate way to live your life and not the most fulfilling one. So, a little bit more time went by and I want to get baptized, right? It got to the point where I was having a lot of just crazy direct encounters with God in terms of experiences over and over and over again in ways that you got to trust me, I was an atheist, right? So like I wanted to deny it just about as much as I could and I just couldn't deny it anymore. And of course, when it gets to the point where you're just starting that process, that baptismal process of basically going from the flesh being prioritized over the spirit and literally transforming that 180 degrees, you get frustrated not being baptized because baptism represents your covenant, your individual level covenant with Christ. And being in that covenant means so much. It means having the Holy Spirit bestowed upon you, which we can talk about sometimes. Really cool thing. And what happens is that you don't have it. So I got so frustrated that our church made us take a baptismal course, which frankly is fair enough, that I filled my bathtub up. I dunked myself in my bathtub, and I thought to myself, you know what, if I die before I get baptized, right, and I encounter God, I'm pretty sure God's going to be like, you know what, he was a good dude, he gave it a shot, right? He's good to go. He gave it a shot, right? Sometimes I think we put way too much emphasis on kind of these rituals and rites of religiosity over and above our personal relationship with God, because that's what God desires and is seeking. He's seeking our hearts. If you don't have access to water, I'm pretty sure that God's not going to deny you, right? Again, who am I to say that? But at the same time, my personal opinion on the matter, right? I ended up getting baptized 2 days before my actual birthday, so it's easy to remember, which anybody who's ever dealt with men, which is all of you, will know that sometimes our memory's not the best. So it really helps me in terms of remembering my actual birthday and then my spiritual birthday, which is a beautiful thing. I got more and more deeply plugged into God, started going to church very often, having a lot of very deep conversations, getting involved in the community, etc. And it was a beautiful thing. So time passed and things started to change. Right? Life starts to get in the way. And this happens for everyone, regardless of whether you're new in your faith or whether you were raised in the church, whatever it is. And it certainly happened for me. Now, what happened in my specific case was that everything seemed to start crumbling around me, right? So my graduate program started to not go so well. Luckily, literally due to God, that ended up working itself out. That relationship ended. And when you're a 21, 22-year-old young man, you really put a lot of emphasis on these things. The start of your career, your first serious relationship, like you name it. And so because of that, I started to gradually fall away. And I essentially stayed fallen away, even though I would still self-define as a Christian during those years. I was not reading the Bible. I was not going to church with any regularity. And when I was going, it was more for that kind of social club aspect as opposed to directly encounter God, right? And I certainly just wasn't, regardless of whether I was praying or not, just spending time actually thinking about, spending time with God. It just wasn't something that was a priority for me. I started to get a little bit depressed. It was very unfortunate, but I stayed in that state of almost a spiritual moratorium, as it were, for over half a decade, really long time, and only started to come out of this after I had started a company. I was very, very lucky, and it was a huge blessing from God that I was able to scale the company to a very high level, and that I was able to sell the company, and through just some insane, miraculous happenings, I won a Fulbright scholarship to go and be a law professor in Israel. And so that's what I did. The company got sold for a wonderful amount directly 2 weeks before I was supposed to move to Israel. Then I had the blessing of going to Israel, and it was the first time I ever read the Bible cover to cover. Let me tell you right now, if you really consider yourself a Christian, I highly, highly recommend taking the time. I found I had a study Bible version of the New International Version, NIV. And I found that if I read, I think it was 34 pages a day, either 17 or 34 pages a day, that I could get through the whole Bible in 2 months. And so that's what I did. I started, Genesis 1, right at the beginning, all the way through to end of Revelations, right? Cover to cover. And it is the single greatest thing I ever did in my entire life. As somebody who's self-defined as a Christian, for 8 years before then, the number of misconceptions that I had about the faith, both because I was just listening to other people, right? And, pastors are so knowledgeable in these things, but sometimes we as people who are absorbing the messages, we can absorb them however we want, right? And it is the case that some pastors do have agendas. Now, I haven't run into many of them, but there are a lot of them. So you do have to be careful, obviously, right? So there is this lack of understanding of how insane it is that everyone has access to scriptures in their language, right? And regardless of what language may be your native tongue, right? The likelihood is almost 100% that you are going to have the Bible in terms of Old Testament and New Testament. You will have access to it in your language. It is wild to think about that access and the fact that we think to ourselves, usually in the day-to-day, oh, you know what? That's great that I've got it. And, I'll go to church for, an hour, 2 hours. Maybe I'll go to a small group for a couple hours once a week. But there's no real need to just get really deep into the Bible. Solely, I know that I should, but, things get in the way. I'll read a psalm every day. I'll read a couple of Proverbs. Maybe I've read Genesis and Exodus in school and high school for metaphorical reasons, and maybe, I read a couple of the letters and I know 1 or 2 of the Gospels. That's pretty par for the course. Until I read the Bible cover to cover, I really did not have a very strong sense of God's character. I really don't believe that I did. So many things that culturally that we are taught about the life of Jesus, about the reason why the Old Testament is so insanely important. People are always pointing at fire and brimstone, Old Testament God. Old Testament God is the most beautiful God, right? And it's the same God as New Testament God, right? It's just updated essentially because of Christ providing everyone access to the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants. That's basically what it is, right? It's just basically opening that door for people who are not Jewish, right? That's what it is. Pretty phenomenal thing, but only phenomenal. You can only really deeply appreciate it if you read the Old Testament. It is such a beautiful tome, the Bible, right? And I always think to myself, if only the Bible were named something else, because the term Bible has such a negative connotation. People like atheists, like I was, right? There is this sense that anybody mentions the Bible, switch goes off, stop listening, start judging, right? You believe in a fairy tale, you're the Easter bunny of humans, you are not intellectual, because I'm in academia, right? I was a professor for God knows how many years, right? I've spoken at every Ivy League university, I've spoken at Oxford and Cambridge, and the amount of anti-religious individuals who self-define as intellectuals, which is its own form of holier than thou, who essentially, without really doing any very, very deep investigation of faith, kind of make a career out of bashing religion or shaming individuals who are religious it's too many to number. And I think it's very unfortunate. And it is what it is. Trust me on this one. I have run into it all the time in my academic career. But that's something we can talk about another time. Moved to Israel, Bible cover to cover. I got into my little Fiat sedan, and when I would get to something, I, for example, got to the Gospels, read about, Christ being raised in Nazareth, get in the car, it's a tiny country, Israel, right? You can drive top to bottom, right? And go from Haifa to Eilat in 7 hours. So I would just drive to these different locations, and it was a phenomenal experience. There was nothing in my life that I have ever done as personally meaningful to me as those months where that is all I was doing. It was such a beautiful thing. I deeply thank the State Department in the US for granting me the opportunity to be able to go and do the Fulbright Scholarship in Israel and just have my life so incredibly transformed. What a program. I'm sincerely grateful. And so then I ended up moving back to the US and finding a phenomenal church called Oak Brook Church. That's where I am now, right? My home church in Northern Virginia. and am even more deeply exploring my faith, right? Now, when I was in Israel, I very deeply prayed because the company had been sold, and I was trying to figure out, what's the next step? What is the next thing in my life? And I've always been very passionate about public speaking, very passionate. I've got doctorates in psychiatry and clinical psychology, so obviously about people and their mental health. I think that there is a tremendous amount of disinformation on different social media platforms of people who are not behavioral health professionals, people who just want to say what they believe, When I say people want to say, speak their truth, is basically just to express their opinion, which is not backed up by the literature. And my very deep passion is to be able to bring you on this channel as much information as I can, which is evidence-based in nature, where there is discrete, replicatable research evidence right out there, which supports the arguments that I'm going to use to be able to talk about different subjects, particularly the subjects of attraction, dating, and relationships, and how those three things are incredibly different. But usually we don't think about them as being different, but there are different prerogatives to be able to hit in each. And obviously, as individuals in the church, we deeply desire not only a direct line with God, but also direct fellowship and connection. A lot of individuals, especially young Christians, deeply desire marriage, and a lot of young Christians who I run into literally in my mentorship and coaching work and just on the day-to-day, they deeply, deeply feel that there is something wrong if they are not in a relationship, or that it's almost like if you're in a relationship, you're married, you're flying first class, and if you're not, there's something wrong with you and you're flying economy. And that is not true. And people need to stop thinking about it like that, right? And that is one of the joys of this channel for me here moving forward with you. And I do hope that you'll join us on this journey by subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell so you get notifications when we post new content, of being able to connect with other Christians, especially single Christians who may be feeling, frustrated or down, or just wanting to optimize themselves, right? Relationships, getting married and all should not be the goal of our lives. It should not. That is something that is going to happen as we deeply pursue not only our one-on-one relationship with God, but also as we deeply pursue the mission that God puts into our hearts. And this is something that can change across seasons. But if you truly believe that God is good, and I truly believe that God is good, I know factually that God loves you, and factually that God deeply desires a personal relationship with you. Knowing all of this, it is a blessing for me to be able to be here in this chair and in your home or your car or your ear to be able to take this journey with you. So that is my testimony. God bless you, and I'm looking forward to hopefully having many more opportunities to interact with you. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, please do not hesitate to get in touch via the details below. God bless you. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed that episode and you'd like to see more original content, then please do click on one of the links right here. I hope to see you in the next one.